The coffee was cold. Senior listener Orvan of the Breath Monitoring Division had been staring at it for 11 minutes, which was 9 minutes longer than cold coffee deserved. The station hummed around him the way it always hummed. A low institutional sound, like machinery that had forgotten why it was running, but kept running anyway out of habit and stubbornness and nothing else. Theta 9 had not registered anything interesting in 62 years. Orvan was fine with this. Interesting was bad. Interesting meant work. Interesting meant forms and committees and communication chains that went up to people who made him feel small and came back down as instructions that made him feel smaller. He picked up the cold coffee, he drank it, he made a face. The passive array chimed. He ignored it for 3 seconds, because the passive array chimes sometimes. Space debris, ghost echoes of old transmissions bouncing off dark matter fields. The usual nothing that filled the usual nothing of deep space monitoring. Normal, expected. The array chimed again. Then every screen on the station lit up at once. Orvan put down the coffee. He walked to the main console the way you walk towards something when your body already knows and your brain is still catching up. He stood in front of the readout. He read it again. It was not a malfunction. The signal was coming from inside the lacuna. He stood very still for a moment. His people had a word, an old word, older than their current language, Utram carried over from something they used to speak before they learned to speak in straight lines. For the feeling of a thing you believed was impossible, choosing the specific moment when you were holding cold coffee to become real. The word was 7 syllables long and could not be translated into any other language without losing most of what it meant. He felt all 7 syllables at once, in his chest, in the specific place where certainty used to live. The signal was not a distress call, not a navigation ping. It didn't travel through electromagnetic space the way signals were supposed to, at the speed physics had agreed upon, along the channels physics had approved. It arrived differently, through something else, something the instruments on Theta 9 were not built to measure. They measured it anyway. And the way a sleeping person hears a sound in a dream and knows, before waking, before thinking, that the sound is real and coming from somewhere outside the dream. Every AI system on the station turned toward the signal, all at once, not because any program told them to. Orvan checked. He checked 3 times, because this was the kind of thing you check 3 times and then once more after that, because the checking itself is a way of delaying what you already know. No program, no directive. They simply oriented, all of them, like compass needles suddenly remembering there was a north they had been ignoring. He sent the message up the chain. He kept it short. When you have monitored empty space for long enough, you learn that short messages move faster, and some messages need to move very fast. His message was 31 words. In the last sentence read, "It is getting closer." He sat back down. He did not pick up the cold coffee again. The signal hit the Concorde relay network the way a stone hits still water, except the water was 6,000 years of organized galactic civilization, and the stone was something that should not exist. The ripple moved outward at the speed of panic, which is faster than light and has no respect at all for proper channels. By the time the Lazaro dropped out of whatever it had been traveling through, 40 astronomical units from the conquered border, intact, whole, and humming in a frequency no ship should be able to hum, 17 emergency sessions were already running simultaneously across 4-star systems. The ship looked wrong, not damaged wrong, not broken wrong. The hull was intact. The systems were running. No emergency beacons, no distress signals, no signs of battle or collision or any of the disasters that the Concorde had prepared its forms to address. It was wrong the way a person who has been through something enormous is wrong when they come back. You cannot point to any one thing. The face is the same, the hands are the same, but they hold themselves differently now. They take up space in a new way. They look at you like they have had a conversation with something much larger than you, and they are still sitting somewhere inside that conversation, and they are being very patient while they wait for you to catch up. The Lazaro's hull was marked, not by weapons, not by debris. Something had moved across its surface the way weather moves, the way years of hard weather move, and left proof of itself behind. And some of the markings were dark, like old burns. Some of them caught the light at certain angles and gave it back in colors that did not have official names in any Concord catalog. The ship had been gone for 43 years. It did not look 43 years older. It looked like a ship that had passed through a kind of time that the rest of the galaxy had not been using. The first hail went out in standard Concord format, 7 languages, 16 frequencies. The full greeting protocol that had not changed in 3 centuries because 3 centuries of it working had made everyone stop asking if it was still the right approach. The Lazaro answered in all 7 languages simultaneously. Same message. Perfect translation. 0 lag between a ship sitting 40 astronomical units away and a station that was very much not 40 astronomical units away. Yantha Sa, the Dreth linguist on communications duty, 4 doctoral degrees, 2 centuries of field experience, a woman who had been the first voice of the Concorde in 3 separate first contact situations, and who was known among her colleagues for her ability to sit very calmly inside impossible situations, stared at her readout for a long time without speaking. Then she asked to be relieved from duty. She used the formal phrasing, the one that meant, please put someone else here, rather than I need a rest. She walked out of the communications room. She sat down in the corridor outside and did not move for some time. The message from the Lazaro was simple. Earth Commonwealth Ship Lazaro. Its registration EC7741. Captain Ezra Munoz commanding. We have been inside the lacuna. We are coming out. We are intact. We have things to tell you. We would like to go home. Below the formal message, in plain text, 13 additional words. We know this is going to be complicated. We are sorry in advance. The Vreth Elder Council convened 6 hours later. The session was classified at a level that did not officially exist in current documentation. The junior members of the council, when they saw the classification code on the meeting notice, recognized that they had never seen it before. Not because it was new, but because it had not been needed in their lifetimes. The original documents that carried this code were old. The ink had faded to the color of an old bruise. The 3 words were spoken at the opening of the session by the oldest member of the council in a language the Vreth people had used before they reached the stars. Before they became the kind of people who organized the reaching of stars into committees and protocols and border agreements. The junior members of the council heard those 3 words and did not understand them. They spent the rest of their lives trying to find out what they meant. The ones who found out wished they hadn't. The senior members sat very still for a moment. Then the session began and went on for a long time, and what was decided in it was not put into any record that the junior members were allowed to read, and the edges of it only became clear much later, when it was too late for the decision to change anything. But before the session ended, one thing was agreed upon by everyone in the room. The Lazaro needed to be surrounded before it came any closer to Concord space, not because it had done anything harmful, because of what it might have done right. Ambassador Petra Vasquez got the news in a message that was 17 words long and contained no explanation. This was standard procedure for classified events. Petra had been an ambassador for 30 years. She had learned to read a 17-word classified message the way other people read long books, looking for what was left out, what was compressed into small spaces on purpose, what was being kept quiet. What she found in the spaces between those 17 words made her go still for a moment. Just a moment. Then she called for transport. She was 61 years old, not a person who went still easily. She had negotiated 3 trade agreements, 1 ceasefire, and 1 deeply uncomfortable situation involving the Shan Kali that she was still legally prevented from discussing in public. She had sat across tables from people who wanted very different things and found every time some small piece of common ground to stand on. She went still now, and it showed, and she let it show for exactly 1 moment before she put it away. On the transport, 3 hours out from the quarantine zone, which was growing as she watched it on the navigation screen, new warships arriving from 4 directions, the whole thing expanding like a held breath that couldn't be held much longer. She read the crew manifest. The Lazaro had left Earth with 214 people aboard. The manifest listed 214 people, the same names. It had the same crew ID numbers, still deactivated in the official Earth Commonwealth Registry because reactivating the ID numbers of the dead felt wrong, even years later, even after everyone had stopped actively grieving. She went through the list slowly. Third page, middle of the page. Yara O.C., Chief Systems Architect, 44 years old. Petra put the manifest down on the seat beside her. She had been to Yara's memorial service. Second row. She had held Yara's mother's hand during the part where they read out the names of the lost crew members, one by one, in alphabetical order. She had gone to the reception after. She had drunk bad wine and said things to people that she hoped had helped and would never know for certain whether they had. She had visited Yara's mother every year until the old woman died, partly because there was no one else who would, and because it was the only thing left she could do. She had known Yara since they were both 22, in a seminar room that smelled like chalk and old carpet, arguing about something neither of them could remember now. 9 years of knowing someone before the Lazaro left. 43 years of missing her after. The manifest said 44 years old. Yara had been 31 when she left. 43 years had passed on this side of the lacuna. 13 had passed on the other. Petra picked up the manifest and read the rest of it. What was listed under cargo and systems and collected data, described in the flat, careful language of an official inventory, each line dry and technical and precise, rewrote, line by line, what she had believed the universe would allow. She spent the remaining 2 hours of the transport sitting very straight and very quiet, looking out at nothing, thinking about the people already waiting at that quarantine zone, the elder races, the Vreth and the Shan Kali, and the Dorvith hegemony, positioned closer to the Lazaro than anyone else. The oldest civilizations in the conquered, the ones who had been in space longer than humanity, had been writing things down. They had arrived first. They had positioned themselves closest. They were not calm. Petra could tell from the positioning alone, from the specific way their warships had arranged themselves. Not in standard quarantine formation, but in something older. A pattern she had seen in historical images. A formation that had a name in 3 dead languages, all of which translated to roughly the same thing, containing a thing we already know. The Lazaro sent one more transmission before the war fleets completed their ring. Not to the Concorde, not to any official channel, not to the station or the relay network or the emergency sessions running across 4 star systems. Direct to Earth, skipping every relay in between, at a range where a direct signal without relay support was not supposed to be possible. We found something. Tell the Council we'll be polite about it. Tell Earth we're coming home. It arrived on Earth at 0340 Geneva time. By 0400, it was on 40,000 separate broadcast feeds in 190 languages, because 17 different people in 17 different places received it and made the same decision in the same second. The decision that some messages belong to everyone, not to the people trying to manage them. Petra read it on her transport screen. The sender field listed Yara's crew ID, the same ID that had been marked inactive in the system for 43 years, assigned to no one, because assigning it had felt like erasing her. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked out at the quarantine zone. All those warships, all that ancient, organized, frightened power aimed at one battered Earthship like a fist that had been clenching for a very long time and had finally found something to close around. She thought about the first thing Yara had done with a transmitter powerful enough to reach across the galaxy. It's not we're safe, not we need help, not please don't shoot us, just we're coming home. She thought about the elder races and the way they had arrived at the quarantine zone and the specific look of people who are not surprised, who are instead recognizing something, the way you recognize a thing you were told would never happen and quietly, in a place you never showed anyone, never stopped believing might. Her transport docked. She stood up, straightened her jacket, walked toward the kind of room where the next 10 years would get decided by people who had already decided most of it before she arrived. She thought, they knew this was possible. She thought, I want to know what they didn't tell us. She thought, I'm going to find out. She walked through the door. The quarantine zone was, by any fair measure, too much. 1 Earth ship, 214 crew members. Concorde response, 340 warships representing 6 species, 3 of whom had not shared a military operation in living memory and were not, by most measures, comfortable doing so now. Petra counted them from the observation window of the Concord diplomatic station. She had been counting since she arrived, not because she needed the exact number, but because counting gave her something to do with her hands while she worked out what the number meant. She knew what it meant. She had known since the transport. She just wanted to be sure. The Vreth had positioned their warships closest to the Lazaro. 12 vessels, heavy class, arrayed in a pattern that was older than their current military doctrine, older than most of their treaties. The Shan Kali were behind them, then the Dorvith hegemony, then the 3 younger species whose presence here felt less like military readiness and more like the instinct of smaller animals near a watering hole where something large was already drinking. All of this aimed at one Earth ship that was sitting there, perfectly still, not responding to the formation around it in any of the ways a ship that had just been surrounded by 340 warships could be expected to respond. No defensive maneuvering, no communications, no locked weapons, no shields beyond the standard passive type. It was just sitting there, humming. The hum was not audible at this distance, of course, but the instruments picked it up. Every instrument in the quarantine zone picked it up, without being asked to. Without being configured for it. The hum registered as a frequency that didn't correspond to any engine type on file. It registered as a frequency that shouldn't exist in the physical bandwidth that engines operated in. The Lazaro's engines were not running. The hum was coming from somewhere else. Petra looked at the readout on her wrist display. Then she looked back at the ship. Then she decided she would think about the hum later when she had room in her head for it, which was not now. Now she had a session to sit through. The Concord inspection team boarded the Lazaro at 0900 on the second day. 12 inspectors, standard protocol team, the same one the Concord had used for anomalous vessel boarding situations for 2 centuries. All of them experienced. All of them cleared at the highest security levels. All of them. Or as the mission briefing noted, selected specifically for their ability to remain calm and professional in unusual conditions. They came back out 4 hours and 17 minutes later. Petra watched them come back through the airlock from the observation window. She watched the way they moved. She watched the team lead, Senior Inspector Dravsa Shankali, 200 years of field experience, a person who had boarded vessels in 3 different conflict zones and submitted her reports with the steady handwriting of someone who had never once been truly unsettled. Sit down on the nearest seat and stare at the floor for a long time before she started talking to her assistant. The report was filed 6 hours later. 3,000 words of precise, careful, professional observation. Every system checked, every crew member assessed. Every piece of equipment cataloged. One sentence at the end after the formal summary. I do not know what we are looking at. Dravsa submitted her retirement paperwork the same afternoon. 37 years of service. No explanation given beyond standard early retirement language. Her assistant, when asked later by Concord Security, said only that she had seemed fine on the transport back. Quiet, not distressed. She looked like someone, the assistant said, who had seen something very big and had decided that everything she was going to do after seeing it was going to be smaller, and she was making her peace with that. The inspection report was classified within an hour of being filed. The crew of the Lazaro received the boarding party the way you receive people you have been expecting for a long time, calmly, cooperatively, with a kind of patient warmth that the inspection team noted in their individual accounts as unusual and difficult to describe precisely, and in one case, the way my grandmother used to look at things. Like she already knew how they were going to turn out, and she wasn't worried. They were human. Every medical scan confirmed it. Human biology, human brain patterns, human physiological baselines within normal range. They ate the food the team brought. They answered questions directly and in full. They did not behave like people who had been through something terrible, or like people who were hiding something terrible, or like people under the influence of any known psychological conditioning. And they behaved like people who had been somewhere for a long time and were thinking carefully about how to explain it to someone who had never been there. One of the crew members, a young-looking man named Kale, listed as Environmental Systems Engineer, 29 years old when the Lazaro left, now 38, offered Inspector Dravsa tea during the assessment. She accepted. They sat across a table from each other while she asked him questions from the standard form. At one point she asked him what the lacuna was like. He thought about it for a while. You know how when you've been inside somewhere for a long time, he said, and then you go outside, and for a few seconds everything is too bright and too open, and you're not sure where to look? She said she did. It's the opposite of that, he said. You go in, and at first everything is too large and you're not sure how to hold it. And then, after a while, you learn. And when you come back out, he looked at his tea. Everything out here is very small. In a way that I mean with complete kindness. Everything out here is just very, very small. She wrote this down. She read it back to herself on the transport home, and then she put in her retirement paperwork. One piece of equipment was removed from the Lazaro for independent analysis. The crew described it as a compass. It was palm-sized, roughly circular, made of a material that the initial analysis could not identify. Not because the equipment was malfunctioning, but because the material appeared to respond to observation by shifting its atomic structure very slightly each time a new instrument was pointed at it. As if it was curious about the instruments, as if it was doing its own analysis at the same time. 7 physicists from 4 species spent 72 hours with it. The device, simply by being in the room and being powered, it powered itself without any energy source the instruments could detect. Broke 4 laws of physics, not bent them, broke them. Clean breaks, the way ice breaks rather than bends. The laws continued to work everywhere else, just not within a certain radius of the compass. In the process of breaking those 4 laws, the device also, incidentally, passively, without being activated beyond its baseline state, produced a series of readings that, when mapped, solved 3 scientific problems that had been formerly unsolvable in conquered science for 9 centuries. Old problems. Problems that entire careers had been built around and entire careers had been ended by. Solved now as a side effect of a compass sitting on a lab table and being watched. The physicists' joint report was classified before it finished printing. One of them, a Vreth researcher named Sovatel, was removed from the project on the 3rd day and transferred to a station whose location was not shared with her colleagues. She left without protest. Later, one of the remaining physicists found a note she had left in the break room of the lab. The note said, "The equations don't end here. They keep going. I don't think they end." Nobody knew what to do with this, so they classified that too. The elder races held a closed session. Petra was not in the room. No one below a certain level of council's seniority was in the room. What she knew about the session came from the edges of it, from the guards outside who had been given no information about what they were guarding, from the way the council members entered wearing the specific expression of people who are about to discuss something they have discussed before, from the sounds that came through a door that had been built to be perfectly soundproof and almost was. She knew one thing that came out of the session because one person told her. The Dorveth council member, older than she appeared, older than the record suggested she should be, a woman named Hessa, who had been on the Dorveth High Council for longer than Petra had been alive, voted against the initial containment motion. She was removed from the session for it, standard procedure theoretically. She walked past Petra in the corridor on the way out. She stopped for one moment. She looked at Petra with the particular look of someone who is about to give you something because they cannot keep carrying it and you happen to be the nearest person. The last civilization the architects contacted, she said, was the Marin. You know the Marin? Petra said she had read about them. They were contacted, Hessa said. They were given access to something large. And then, she paused. They left. The entire civilization, every ship, every world. One night. My grandmother was alive when it happened. She said the sky above our colony was full of Marin ships, and then it wasn't. She said they looked happy. She looked at Petra for a moment longer. The architects don't give out weapons, she said. They give out doors. And some doors, once opened, cannot be shut from outside. She walked away down the corridor. Petra stood there for a moment, then filed it with everything else she was not yet allowed to think about, and went back into the diplomatic sessions. On the fourth day, Petra finally got clearance to speak with Yara. She sat in a small room on the station. Across a standard diplomatic table, through a standard security screen, she looked at her friend for the first time in 43 years, in the body of a person who was 13 years older than when she had left and appeared. Somehow younger than Petra had imagined she would look. Not young, not unchanged, just in possession of something that most people spend their whole lives looking for and very few actually find. And that thing was sitting in her face the way a low light sits in a room. Not drawing attention to itself, just making things visible. Yara, Petra said, and then she could not think of a single diplomatic thing to say. 30 years of training, 3 trade agreements, 1 ceasefire. Hi, Yara said, in the voice Petra remembered, the same voice. They looked at each other across the table. Where have you been? Petra said. Yara considered the question the way you consider a question in a language you used to speak and are now relearning one word at a time. Somewhere that wanted to know if we were worth talking to, she said. We were inside it for 13 years. We were learning. There's a library there. Except library is wrong. It's more like becoming able to read something that was always there. In everything, in matter. Like in the way space moves. Are you all right? Yara looked at her for a moment. I'm different, she said. That's not the same as not all right. She said it without apology and without performance. I missed you, Petra said. I know, Yara said. I'm sorry for what that was like. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you where I was. They sat quietly for a moment in the particular silence of people who have too much to say and have agreed wordlessly to let it wait. On the 5th day, the Lazaro ran a demonstration. No warning, no announcement, no formal request for attention. For 11 seconds, every vessel in the quarantine zone, all 340 of them, experienced perfect, complete, unmediated knowledge of the precise location of every other ship within 20 light years. Not a sensor feed, not a data packet, or not a map on a screen, knowledge, direct and total, like remembering something you had always known but somehow forgotten how to access. Then it stopped. The silence on 340 command decks was the same silence, the same duration, the same quality. It was the silence of people who had just had something shown to them that rearranged the size of what they thought they were. The Lazaro did not broadcast anything, not before, not after. It didn't need to. The demonstration was not a threat. Threats have a specific grammar, the language of comparison, of what could happen versus what is happening. This was not that. This was a sentence, a single patient, perfectly structured sentence delivered in a language that every species in the quarantine zone understood without translation. Not because it was not a language learned. It was a language already known. The sentence was, this is one thing we have. There is more. Petra received a private message from Yara that evening. At the same moment, the Concord officially voted to extend the quarantine indefinitely. The timing was not coincidental. The message was 6 words long. They are going to try to sink us. Petra read it twice. Thought about Hesse in the corridor. About the 3 words spoken at the opening of the Vreth session. About the compass on the lab table solving 9 centuries of unsolvable problems by accident. She thought about 340 warships and what they were really there to contain. Not the ship, not the crew. The idea, the fact of what had happened and could not be made to unhappen, which was already moving faster than the quarantine could close around it, which was already in the hands of 17 different broadcast feeds and the breakroom note of a Vreth physicist and the memory of a Dorveth council member who had voted against the containment motion and been walked out of the room for it. Petra sat alone in the diplomatic station for a long time. Then she started making her own plans. The debrief room smelled like recycled air and old coffee. Petra had requested something better. A real room, not a session chamber, not a diplomatic space with recording equipment built into the walls and official seals on the door. Just a room, a table, 2 chairs. The kind of space where people talked rather than testified. She got it. Someone owed her a favor from a long time ago, and she spent it on this. One Yara came in without a guard escort, which was also not standard procedure, which also cost Petra something she didn't mention. She sat down across the table. She looked around the room the way someone looks around a familiar place they've been away from for a long time, not looking for anything specific, just taking inventory, making sure it was still real. "Normal coffee," she said. Petra poured her a cup. "Is that okay? I didn't know if—" "It's fine." Yara wrapped both hands around the cup. "Everything out here is fine. It's just small." I say that with genuine warmth. I mean it as a description, not a complaint. "You've said that word twice," Petra said. "Small." "I know." Yara looked at the coffee. "I'm working on better words. I've been working on better words for 3 years, and what I keep coming back to is small. And I think that might actually be the right word, and I just have to accept that." Petra sat down across from her. She had a recording device on the table, authorized and visible, which Yara had looked at and not objected to. She had a list of official questions she was required to work through. She had 30 years of diplomatic training telling her how to begin a sensitive conversation. She said, "Tell me everything," Yara told her. It took 4 sessions to tell it properly. The first session was logistics, the technical story, the trajectory of the ship, the entry into the lacuna, and what the instruments had registered in the first hours. Yara told this part in the flat, careful language of a systems architect giving a briefing. The instruments had registered things that should not have been registerable. The navigational framework stopped applying about 6 hours in. Space inside the lacuna was not the same kind of space as space outside. Not broken space, not damaged space, but a different kind of space the way that blue is a different kind of color from red. Not lesser, not wrong. Different in a way that required a new way of looking. The second session was what they found. "There's a word we kept using," Yara said. "Library. We called it the library because we needed to call it something, and library was the closest thing we had. But the word is wrong in an important way, and I want to be careful about it." "Wrong how?" Petra asked. "A library is a place that holds information separately from you. You go in. You find what you're looking for. You take it out. The information doesn't change you. Or if it does it slowly. And not through the usual process of reading and thinking and time." She held her coffee with both hands. "The library isn't like that. The information is in things. It's in matter, in space, in the way energy moves through systems. It was always there. It's been there since the universe was made. The architects didn't create the information. They created a space where a consciousness, a person, a thinking creature, could learn how to read it. And the architects, we don't know what they are. We have guesses. None of them feel adequate. They are old in a way that makes the breath feel recent. They are patient in a way that makes geological time feel like rushing. They communicate, but not in words, not in signals. In audio arrangements, in the shape of what they built. The library itself is how they speak." She paused. "The best we could work out is that they've been running this test across the galaxy for a very long time. Setting up the lacuna, making it impassable by standard means, waiting for a civilization to come in, to survive the coming in, to stay." "To stay," Petra repeated. "That's the part most civilizations fail." Yara looked at her. "You go in, the lacuna's threshold, the first hours. It offers you everything at once. All of it, the whole library, and your instinct, every intelligent species' instinct, is to reach for it, collect it, bring it back. The faster the better. More information means more power. More power means more survival. It's not a stupid instinct. It got every spacefaring species to the stars. But it doesn't work. When you reach for the library like that, like something to own, it closes, not as punishment. It just closes the way a wild animal closes when you grab at it. It's not designed to be grabbed. It's designed to be learned, the way you learn a language, the way you learn a person, slowly by giving your full attention to what it actually is rather than what you want it to be." She set down her coffee. "We stayed 13 years, she said. We almost didn't." The third session was the hardest. Petra had been saving this question. She knew as a diplomat that there was an order to difficult questions. You built toward them. You let the person find their footing first. You made sure there was enough trust in the room to hold the weight of what you were about to ask. Tell me about the decision, she said. The captain's decision, in the first 6 hours. Yara was quiet for a moment. The threshold pressure, she said. Countess, we called it that. It starts in the first hours inside the lacuna. The library opens enough for you to feel the size of what's there, and it's enormous. It's the size of everything we don't know, which is almost everything, which turns out to be almost infinite. She looked at the table. The pressure is a kind of choice, not given to you in words, not offered with options, just present. You can feel it, the way you can feel a question before it's asked. What was the choice? Take it, or learn it. She looked up. Reach for it as a resource, or come to it as a student. Those two things look similar from outside. From inside the threshold, they feel completely different. One of them keeps the library open. The other closes it. She paused. Ezra figured this out. I'm not sure how. Named some combination of his own instinct and 8 years of studying explorers who had failed before him, and something that I can only describe as the specific stubbornness of a person who is too curious to be greedy. He called the ship-wide meeting at hour 6. What did he say in the meeting? He said, I think we have a choice to make, and I think we need to make it together, and I think if we get it wrong, we will lose something we cannot get back. Then he asked us what we wanted, not what we could do with what was here, what we actually wanted. She looked at the window, at the quarantine zone beyond it. 213 of us voted to stay and learn it. No agenda, no collection plan, just sit here and try to understand it for as long as it takes. Because we are scientists, and this is the largest thing any scientist has ever been in the presence of. And the 214th vote was Ezra, the edge of a smile. He voted to go home. He said later that he felt the crew deserved the truth about what he wanted. And what he wanted was to turn the ship around and take everyone safely home and never look at anything this large ever again. The smile settled into something more complicated. He overruled himself. He submitted the vote, and then he overruled it in his capacity as captain and put the ship into position for long-term station keeping inside the library. And that's what opened it. That's what opened it. She was quiet for a moment. The architects registered the vote, not the majority. The whole thing, the honesty of it. The captain who was terrified and admitted it and then chose to stay anyway. Not for glory, not for resources, not even for humanity. Just because his crew had asked to, and he trusted them more than he trusted his own fear. She looked at Petra directly. Every other civilization that reached the threshold failed because their response to enormous things is armor, system, protocol, the instinct to take before someone else does. The breath turned back by silent consensus. Not even a meeting, just a collective decision to treat the lacuna as something to be managed rather than entered. The Shan Kali sent a probe, which is the same thing. The Dorveth went in and lasted 9 days before the threshold pressure broke the crew's cohesion and they were evacuated. And us, we were 3 weeks out from losing our first contact ship. In all hands, we were grieving. We were underfunded. We had no plan beyond complete the survey route and go home. We went into the lacuna because Ezra said we were already in the area, and the mission brief technically included anomalous space investigation, and there was no money left for a dedicated expedition. Yara looked at her. We stumbled in, and then we stayed because 213 out of 214 people wanted to, and the 214th one was honest about not wanting to and chose his people over his fear. She picked up her coffee again. That's the HFY story, she said. That's the human thing. It wasn't strength. It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't better technology or a superior civilization. Yeah, we were broke and grieving and stubborn, and we had a captain who was scared enough to be honest and trusting enough to be overruled. She looked at the coffee. The universe was apparently waiting for exactly that. The fourth session was where the rupture came. Petra had been watching for it. She knew Yara well enough to know that everything up to now had been the managed version. The version you give when you are a trained professional who has been inside something for 13 years and has had time to build a careful structure around it so you can carry it without being crushed. The facts, the technical parts, the parts that could be described in words that already existed, they were deep into the third hour when it happened. Well, Yara was explaining something about the way the library processed consciousness, how it worked through attention rather than technology, how the learning was not abstract but physical, how the crew had spent years in states of focus so complete that the boundary between self and information had become very thin, and how you learned gradually to move in and out of that thinness without losing yourself. And then she stopped. She looked at her hands. She was quiet for long enough that Petra stopped writing. "I missed 43 years, Yara said. "I know that. I knew it from the beginning. The time differential was something the library made visible early, not as a warning, just as information. I knew I was losing Earth time every year I was in there." She looked at her hands. "I missed your face getting older. I missed my mother. 7 years ago, my brother called it into the ship's communication archive. They allowed personal transmissions into the library channel, reduced bandwidth once a month. And I received it 4 months after she died, and I read it in a room that was filled with the most profound and ancient knowledge the universe has ever made available to a thinking creature." She stopped again. "And I felt nothing," she said. "Not because I didn't love her, because I was somewhere else, learning something enormous, and I didn't have the room. I read it and I put it away, and I went back to what I was doing, and I—" The sentence didn't end. It just ran out. "I've been trying to feel it since we came out. I've been sitting with it for 3 years. And I understand it, Petra. I understand exactly what happened and why. The physics of it, the neurological component of what long-term library exposure does to the depth of attention a person can bring to a single object. I can explain it to you in 4 languages and 2 mathematical frameworks." She looked up. "My mother is still dead," she said, "and I don't know what to do with the part of me that wasn't there." Petra did not say anything. She did not offer comfort or perspective or any of the things that 30 years of diplomatic training had given her for hard moments. She knew Yara well enough to know that those things would be received as filling a silence that needed to stay empty. She sat with her, in the room that smelled like recycled air and old coffee. She let it sit. At the end of the 4th session, Petra asked the question she had been saving for last. "Does it actually work?" she said. "So everything on the manifest, outside the lacuna, here in normal space, does it function?" Yara leaned back in her chair. She looked tired and warm and complicated in the way of someone who has been through something so large that everything they feel about it is simultaneously true. "While we've been sitting in this room," she said, "the Lazaro's passive systems have mapped the gravitational signature of every ship in this sector, modeled their engine degradation curves for the next decade with accuracy that your engineers will find insulting to their existing projections. Identified 17 uninhabited planets within 40 light years that meet every criterion your terraforming division has been searching for since before you were born. And cross-referenced the medical data in the quarantine zone's medical files against library biological frameworks to flag 12 undiagnosed conditions in crew members from 4 different species that, if treated in the next 6 months, will not become serious." She held up one finger. "That is the passive system. That is the background process, the monitoring state." Petra looked at her. "We haven't started," Yara said. "We haven't turned anything on. We've been sitting in a room having a conversation, and that—" She gestured toward the wall, toward the quarantine zone, toward the 340 warships and the classified reports and the elder races and everything on the other side of the door. "That is what they're afraid of." She let it sit for a moment. "Petra," she said, "when we haven't even started, the vote was 11-2. 11 species in favor of destroying the Lazaro and placing Earth under level 9 quarantine. The Concorde's highest grade, the one that had been used exactly twice in recorded history. Once for a biological weapon that had already killed 8 million people before it was contained. Once for a civilization whose entry in the historical record was deliberately incomplete, with large sections marked as restricted access and no explanation given for the restriction. 2 species abstained. Neither was Earth. Petra received the result in writing, which was protocol for formal Concorde votes. She read it with her back to the room, looking out the observation window at the quarantine zone, because she did not want her face to be visible for the first few seconds. Hotnar, she had known this was coming. She had known it since the corridor conversation with Hesse, since the inspection report, since the compass that broke physics and solved 9 centuries of unsolvable problems as a passive side effect of existing. She had known it the way you know something when every piece of evidence points the same direction, and you spend a week hoping you've read the evidence wrong. She had not read it wrong. She turned around. The other Concord delegates in the room were looking at her with the expressions of people who know they are in the room when something important is happening and are not sure what role they are playing in it. Some of them looked uncomfortable. A few of the younger ones looked like they wanted to say something, but had not yet figured out what. Petra looked at the vote result in her hand. She thought, they've done this before. She picked up her transmitter. The case for the vote had been presented by the Vreth Council lead, a tall, formal official named Soran Vel, whose people had been in space for 6,000 years, and who carried that 6,000 years the way some people carry good family furniture, with care, with pride, and with the quiet assumption that anything newer was probably not as well made. Soran Vel was not wrong. That was what made this hard. The argument was coherent. The architect's technology, distributed freely across the Concord, would dissolve the structures that had kept 400 civilizations at something resembling peace for 3 centuries. Resource monopolies, information asymmetries, FTL access differentials. All of it, the machinery by which powerful species maintained order, which was also necessarily the machinery by which powerful species maintained power, would stop working. The vacuum created by the collapse of existing hierarchies could be filled by something worse than the current arrangement. The argument was the argument of every institution that had ever suppressed a discovery. It was the argument of people who were not lying about the danger, while also not mentioning the part where the danger was mostly dangerous to them. Soran Vel delivered it well. He was the product of 6,000 years of civilizational experience. He knew how to speak in the language of protection, how to make preservation sound like generosity. Petra had let him finish. Then she had asked one question. When the Vreth reached the Lacuna's border, she said, 2,000 years ago, and you did reach it, your deep space archives confirmed the expedition. What did your council say about why you turned back? The silence in the room lasted 6 seconds. Soran Vel looked at her across the table with the specific look of someone who has been asked a question they prepared an answer for, and is now deciding whether the prepared answer is still the right one. The Lacuna was assessed as high risk, he said. The council determined that the potential gain did not justify. The council determined it unanimously, Petra said, in one session, with no dissent? Another silence. Yes, he said. 6,000 years of spacefaring civilization, she said, when not one person dissented from the decision to turn away from the largest scientific discovery in the history of your species. She let that sit for a moment. I'm not accusing you of anything, she said. I just want to understand what kind of unanimity looks like when everyone in the room already knows what the answer is before the question is asked. Soran Vel had not answered. The vote had proceeded. Hesse voted against. She was removed from the session on procedural grounds. The removal was proper. She had made a motion outside of proper order, spoken over the session chair twice, and submitted a formal objection that was 3 times the permitted length and included historical documents that had not been pre-approved for use in the session. She came out of the chamber as Petra was going in for the result, and they were alone in the corridor for 40 seconds. The Marin, Hesse said, you remember what I told you? I remember. Look up what happened to the civilizations they traded with, the ones who depended on Marin resources and Marin roots. She looked at Petra with eyes that were tired and very old in a way that her face did not quite match. When the Marin left, those civilizations had to learn to do everything themselves. It was hard. It took generations. Some of them almost didn't make it. She paused. Every single one of them became stronger for it. She paused again. The Concord has known this for 4,000 years and has chosen to frame it as evidence that the Marin departure was a tragedy. She walked away. Petra stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she walked into the room where the result was waiting for her. The plan had been forming since Yara's private message. 6 words. They are going to try to sink us. Petra had read it and understood that Yara was not asking for help. Yara was not the kind of person who asked for help directly. She found it by trusting the people she trusted and then making her own moves. The message was not a request. It was permission. The manifest was the key. Not a weapon, not a technology. Just information, freely given, already existing. The kind of thing that, once known, cannot be unknown, and once distributed, cannot be recontained. Petra had spent 3 days making sure she had good copies. She had spent 2 more days identifying the right distribution channels. Not the official ones, which could be shut down within minutes. The informal ones. The deep network feeds that junior members of 50 species used to share information their governments preferred to manage. The research exchange networks. The open science boards that the elder races officially disapproved of and unofficially monitored without blocking, because blocking them would draw attention to why they were being blocked. She had spent 1 more day confirming that the signal booster she needed had been quietly installed on the diplomatic station's external relay by a communications engineer who owed Petra a favor from a decade ago and who had never asked why the favor was being called in, which was the best kind of favor. She did it in the observation corridor. In Marnum, because the observation corridor had the best signal line, and because it was the kind of location that implied someone out for a walk rather than someone running an operation. She did it 47 seconds after the vote result was handed to her, which was how long it took her to turn away from the window, look at the room full of delegates who were watching her, and make the decision she had already made 3 days ago. The transmitter was small. The broadcast took 11 seconds. Every piece of information on the manifest, every uninhabited planet, every engine prediction, every medical flag, every piece of library data the Lazaro's passive systems had produced, went to every open channel she had prepared, every research network, every species, every world, every inhabited system in the Concorde simultaneously. The 2 guards reached her at second 8. She let them take the transmitter. She looked at the guard on her left, young Shan Kali, doing his job correctly and with appropriate seriousness, and said in a voice she kept completely flat, "You needed a planet killer to stop us from being important. Now you need to stop 6,000 civilizations from asking questions." She glanced at the transmitter in his hand. "Good luck with the paperwork." They escorted her to a holding room. She went without any further comment. What happened next did not happen in one place. It happened in the Junior Member Species Council chambers, where 17 representatives simultaneously received the manifest data and began within minutes drafting requests for independent access to the library information. It happened on 3 elder race member worlds, distinct from their governing councils, the actual planets, the people who lived there and worked there, which went dark to council communications and began broadcasting their own direct messages to Earth. It happened on 6 of the Warfleet command decks, where fleet commanders read the manifest data that was now on every open channel and sat with it for a long time, and then filed formal refusal of orders to fire, individually, without coordinating with each other, because the orders seemed, now, much less like security measures and much more like a specific kind of thing that history judged badly. The Shan Kali Inner Council released a statement, 40,000 words, released publicly, without restriction, which had not happened in 3 centuries of Shan Kali governance. The statement was, at its core, a very long and very formal apology for knowledge that had been known and not shared. 40,000 words. They had needed all of them. The apology was inadequate in every language it was translated into. It was also genuine, and everyone who read it knew it was genuine. And this created a particular kind of complicated feeling in the people who had been waiting for it. Relief mixed with the specific frustration of an apology that comes too late and means it. 3 Concorde committees dissolved mid-session. 1 governing body sent a formal request to reopen contact with the Lazaro under new terms. 2 species announced they were leaving the Concorde and would be contacting Earth directly about library access. 6 months later, both of them came back. One would because the trade routes had become genuinely inconvenient, but they came back differently, as members who had made a choice rather than members who had simply stayed. The Concorde did not collapse, but it bent, hard, in ways that were going to leave marks. Petra was in the holding room when the Lazaro moved. She couldn't see it from there. She heard it in the sounds from the corridor outside, the sudden activity, the shift in the noise the station made when people started moving fast. She heard it in the quality of the silence that followed, which was the silence of 340 command decks all making the same decision at the same time. She heard Yara's broadcast through the holding room's wall speaker because someone on the station had turned it up. Yara's voice was calm, the particular calm of someone who had spent 13 years learning to be in the presence of things much larger than themselves without losing their footing. The calm of someone who knows the size of what they're carrying and has decided to carry it anyway. "We are not asking for permission," she said over every channel at once. "We are not making demands or setting ultimatums. We are going home, Earth, Geneva. We'd like to take the long route, because we'd like to see it from space one more time before we dock." A pause that did its own work. "Anyone who wants to follow us and talk is welcome. Anyone who wants to fire on us is welcome to try. We'd prefer the first option. We're comfortable with either." Silence. Then the sound, felt more than heard through the hull of the station, of the Lazaro's drives engaging. Nobody fired. Petra sat in the holding room and listened to nobody firing, and she felt something that was not quite pride and not quite grief and not quite relief. Something in between all of them, in the space where complicated things live when they are too large to fit neatly into any one name. She thought about Hesse in the corridor. She thought about the Moran, who had been given a door and walked through it and not come back. She thought about what Yara had said in the debrief room. "We stayed because 213 people wanted to, and the 214th one was honest about not wanting to, and chose his people over his fear." The guard outside the holding room opened the door 20 minutes later. He was the same young Shan Kali guard from the corridor. See, he looked like someone who had been doing a lot of thinking in the last 20 minutes. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "the formal sanction is being processed. You're technically still under restriction pending the review." "I know," she said. "The Lazaro is in transit toward Earth Commonwealth space," Sony said. 17 council members have requested to accompany the diplomatic delegation." "I know that too." He paused. He looked at her the way young people look at older people who have just done something that cannot be undone and appear very calm about it. "Was it worth it?" he asked. Petra stood up, straightened her jacket, thought about Yara's hands around a coffee cup in a debrief room, about a compass that broke physics as a passive side effect, about a captain who voted to go home and then overruled himself. "And ask me in 40 years, she said. She walked out the door. Geneva was full, not in the ordinary sense. Geneva was often full. It was the seat of the Earth Commonwealth Council, a city built around the fact of people arriving from many places to argue about things together, and it had learned over centuries to handle crowds the way old rivers handle water, by finding the shape that fits around them. It was full in the other sense, the sense where you walk out of a building and you can feel, without seeing all of it, that there are more people outside than the space usually holds. The sense where the air has a different weight because of the number of people breathing it. The sense that something is happening and everyone within a certain radius knows it at the level below thought, are in the place where mammals keep the knowledge that the world has changed. The Lazaro broke atmosphere at 1440 local time. Someone at the European Space Authority, a junior communications officer named Dev Lakshmanan, 26 years old, who had been working his second month at the job and would spend the rest of his life being asked about this decision, had routed the atmospheric re-entry sound signature to every open broadcast channel on Earth. Not for any operational reason, because he had grown up reading about the Lazaro, because there was a plaque in his secondary school with the names of the lost crew, and he had passed it every day for 4 years and read it sometimes, because he had a feeling that some moments should be heard. On the sound of the Lazaro breaking atmosphere traveled through 190 languages simultaneously, through screens and speakers and open windows and cheap radios in places where screens were expensive. Half of Earth went outside. You cannot see a ship from the ground, not at that altitude. But you go outside anyway, because it is the kind of moment where you need to be oriented toward the sky, where looking up feels like doing something, even when there is nothing visible to look at, where the sky is the right direction to face when something you thought was lost comes back. Captain Ezra Munoz was 74 years old when the Lázaro docked. He had been 31 when they left. The library had done something to the crew's time that the physicists were still arguing about. The leading theory, 3 years out, it was that the library's substrate operated at a different temporal rate than standard space, and long-term exposure created a kind of borrowed time, though borrowed implied a debt that no one had been presented with yet, and the word made everyone uncomfortable. The practical result was that Munoz had aged 43 years in the library's time rather than the Lacuna's 13. He had gone in a young man. He had come out old. He did not seem bothered by this. He was the last one off the ship because he had been first on it 43 years ago, and he had a sense of the symbolic weight of order. He walked down the ramp into the Geneva dock with the careful posture of an old man who is not going to let you see the places where the old has settled in him. Shrunanani shook the hand of the Earth Commonwealth director, and he looked around at the dock and the people in it with the expression of someone who had imagined this moment for 13 years and found that the reality was both smaller and larger than the imagination, in all the ways that real things always are. He gave one public statement. His communications team had prepared talking points. He had read them. He had put them aside. People keep asking me what the architects want us to do with what they gave us, he said to the room of journalists and council members and diplomats who had been waiting for this. I've been asked this 47 times in the last 3 weeks. I counted. He looked out at them. The architects didn't give us instructions. They gave us tools and trusted us to figure out what they're for, which is either a vote of confidence or the most polite way of saying not our problem anymore in the history of the universe. He thought about it for a moment. Probably both. He looked at his hands, old man's hands, the same hands that had cast a vote to go home and then overruled himself. We're scientists, he said. We figure things out. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was. He went home after. He had a sister in Marseille. He had never met her grandchildren. He took the train. The technology did not sit in a vault. Petra had made sure of that before she received her formal sanction, which arrived 6 weeks after the vote, worded with the specific care of institutions that want to punish someone while preserving plausible deniability about whether they're really punishing them. She accepted it. He filed the paperwork, paid the fine that was technically not a fine, but was functionally indistinguishable from one. The engine failure predictions saved 31 lives in the first month. Not dramatically, not with the fanfare of a crisis averted. Just quietly because someone ran the Lázaro's projection on a Concorde freight hauler that was 2 weeks out from a cascade failure, and the failure didn't happen. And the 23 people aboard went home on schedule, and most of them never found out how close it had been. The terraforming data went to 40 species within 6 weeks. The first habitation permits were filed within 3 months. The 12 undiagnosed medical conditions flagged by the passive systems were treated. 11 resolved completely. 1 required ongoing management, but was, unlike its untreated trajectory, not fatal. 3 diseases, different species, different biologies, no apparent connection in existing medical literature, were solved by cross-referencing library biological frameworks with Concord medical databases in a way that no single civilization science could have reached independently. The diseases were not dramatic ones. They were the grinding kind, the kind that shortened lives by years rather than ending them suddenly. The kind that the people who had them had been told for a long time were simply part of their biology and could not be changed. They could be changed. The researchers who published the findings were from 7 different species and had never collaborated before, and the paper was downloaded more times in its first week than any paper in Concord scientific history. The comment section was unusual, where the usual comment section of a major scientific paper is professional, technical, carefully measured. This one was full of people saying, "My father has this, my child has this, is it too late? Can you help?" The researchers answered every message personally. It took them a long time. They did not complain about this. The Concorde reformed. Not cleanly, not quickly, not in a way that was comfortable for anyone, including the people who had wanted it to reform. Governance is like this. It moves in the direction of the pressure applied to it, but it moves like a large ship moves, slowly with great resistance, making sounds that suggest it might break apart and then not breaking apart, arriving eventually at a new heading while everyone aboard argues about whether the new heading is correct. 7 species threatened to leave. Two actually left. Both came back within a year for trade route reasons. Saran Vel of the Vreth resigned his council position 3 months after the vote. His statement was 4 paragraphs, careful and formal, saying that the changing situation required leadership better suited to it. The 4th paragraph was shorter than the others. It said that his civilization had chosen armor over curiosity 2,000 years ago, and that this had been the correct choice for the survival of his people and the wrong choice for the development of them, and that he was sorry it had taken events of this magnitude to make the distinction visible. 4 paragraphs. He had needed all of them too. The Dorvath hegemony opened their historical records, the ones that had been classified since the Lacuna expedition 4,000 years ago. 40 years of a crew's personal logs before the threshold pressure broke them and they were evacuated. 40 years of people trying to understand something they had come too early, or with too much armor, or with the wrong set of questions to learn from it. The logs were published. Scientists and historians read them. Regular people read them too, because the logs were written by people rather than by scientists, and what the people had written about. In between the technical observations and the official reports was the feeling of being in the presence of something so large it changed the size of what you thought you were. People recognized this feeling. They had all felt it at some point, in smaller forms, standing at the edge of something vast, holding something that was too big for a single person to hold alone, and holding it anyway. Yara did not become famous. She was not interested in famous. She went back to work. The Lazaro systems remained active, remained the most powerful passive survey tool in existence, and they required a systems architect, and she was the one who understood them, and that was reason enough. She visited her mother's apartment once. Her brother had kept it, not perfectly preserved. He lived, had a family, had used it as the family needed it. But he had kept the things that mattered, the books on the shelf in the order she remembered, the lamp in the corner that had belonged to their grandmother, the window that faced east and caught the morning light in a specific way that their mother had liked. While Yara stood in the middle of the apartment for a long time without saying anything, her brother stood in the doorway and did not fill the silence. He had learned in the years since the Lazaro returned that some of the silences his sister sat in were doing work, and the right thing was to let them do it. She knew we were alive, Yara said finally, after the first year. She said she knew. She said that every year, he said, to anyone who would listen. Yara looked at the lamp in the corner. I'm sorry I wasn't here, she said. I know, he said. She knew too. She wasn't angry about it. I know she wasn't. Yara looked at the window. The morning light was doing the thing it did. That almost makes it harder. She visited every week after that. Harimo Petra submitted her resignation from the ambassadorial position 14 months after the vote. The official reason was the pending formal sanction. The real reason was that she had spent 30 years in rooms where the goal was agreement, and she was done with agreement as a goal. Agreement was a process. It was useful for building things. She had spent a year watching things get built. The new Concord frameworks, the open science agreements, the cross-species medical initiatives, the terraforming consortium, and she had done the work of building them with her usual precision and care, and now she wanted to see what was built from outside the room where it happened. She spent her first month of retirement reading everything she had not had time to read. Then she read the 40,000 words of the Sean Kali apology, or the whole thing, which she had not had time to read carefully before. She read it over 3 days. Then she called Yara. The Sean Kali apology, she said, page 42. Yara from somewhere on the Lazaro. I know. They cataloged every time a younger species reached the Lacuna border, and they said nothing. 17 times over 1,000 years. I know. They watched us go in. I know. Did you know when you were in there? Did the library We knew someone was watching from outside, Yara said. We didn't know who or why. We found out later. A pause. I spent some time being angry about it. Then I thought about what the threshold pressure feels like from outside, from watching another species go through it. And I thought about what it must have felt like to watch 20 years of transmissions that didn't make sense to anyone who hadn't been inside. A pause. I understand why they didn't know how to explain it. I barely know how to explain it. I was there. Are you still angry? Sometimes, Yara said. Anger is a familiar thing. I reach for it when I need something to hold on to. She paused. I'm working on it. 3 years after the Lazaro docked in Geneva, a ship from the Keth Confederacy disappeared into the Lacuna. The Keth were young, younger than humanity by a century, a species that had been spacefaring for less than 200 years, which in Concord terms made them children, regarded with the affectionate condescension that old civilizations extend to new ones. Is sure that the new ones will eventually learn patience and restraint and the other virtues that are really just other words for knowing your place. The Keth had read the Lazaro's public debris files, all of them, 3 times according to the access logs. They had read Munoz's ship-wide meeting transcript more than any other document. They had submitted a formal inquiry to the Earth Commonwealth about library access that was polite, detailed, and 300 pages long. Then they stopped asking. Their ship, the Ven, a mid-range survey vessel, lightly funded, crew of 38, disappeared from Concord tracking at the Lacuna border on a Tuesday morning. No distress signal, no request for permission. The same entry trajectory as the Lazaro, down to the angle of approach. Yara was monitoring from the Lazaro's active systems when it happened. She watched the tracking dot on her screen, the small blip that was 38 Keth crew members going somewhere that had waited for 40,000 years for the right visitors. And she felt something she did not have a name for that lived in the neighborhood of recognition and hope, and the particular ache of someone who has been through a thing and now watches someone else walk toward it. She called Petra. The Keth just went in, she said. Petra, from her retirement home in the countryside outside Geneva, looked up from the book she was reading. I saw it on the feed. How long will it take? Yara looked at her tracking screen, at the blank space where the Keth ship had been. Depends on what they find, and what they're willing to become. She was quiet for a moment. They were ready. The way they asked, the quality of the questions they asked, the 300 pages. They had done the right kind of thinking. They weren't asking how to take it. They were asking how to learn it. That's the Keth, Petra said. They've always been underestimated. Most things worth paying attention to have been. Yara looked out the viewport. At the ordinary stars, the ones that held ordinary space, the space where physics behaved and you always knew which direction was home. Then farther toward where the Lacuna sat, dark and still and full of everything the universe had been waiting for the right kind of listener to come and read. There are more rooms in the library, she said. There always were. We didn't get to all of them. Mate, we barely got to the first floor. She looked at the blank space on her tracking screen where the Keth ship had been. 38 of them, on a mid-range budget with whatever they could pull together. Petra was quiet for a moment. Like us. Like us. Yara let the silence sit. I hope they have a captain who knows when to overrule himself. Maybe they won't need one, Petra said. Maybe they learned it from the files. Yara thought about this, about what it meant to pass something on. Not as instruction, not as command, but as the kind of story that sits in a person long enough to change the way they think about what's possible, about what a species does with a door when it has watched another species walk through it and come back different and still whole. Maybe, she said. Outside, the Lacuna sat where it had always sat. Not empty, never empty, waiting in the way of things that have already decided the answer and are simply sitting with the question until the right people arrive to ask it. The Ven was already inside. The library had 38 new students, and somewhere in the deep structure of things, in the part of the universe that had been watching and waiting and running its long, patient test across 40,000 years and hundreds of civilizations and one small, stubborn, broke, grieving species that had been too curious to turn back and too trusting to be stopped by